Welcome to the Rabbi Daniel Lapin Show. Greetings to each and every one of you happy warriors, and thank you so much for being part of the show where I, your rabbi, reveal how the world really works. This is the show where we speak about the things that really matter in your life. Thanks for being part of the show, and thanks for your help in telling folks about it. And I know you're doing lots of that because the show is growing, and that is very gratifying for me and fills me with renewed enthusiasm as I prepare and deliver the show. Now, something happened in Africa just recently, and I'm taping this right in the middle of September 2022, but it doesn't really matter because, as you know, I focus as much as possible on the show being what I call evergreen, meaning that it doesn't really matter. This isn't a news show. You don't need me for the news. You have your own access to the news, which in many cases is probably better than mine. So, no, we're talking about things that are as true this year as they would have been 2 years ago, and, interestingly enough, as true as they will be in 10 years' time. So, yes, evergreen it is. But nonetheless, lessons can be learned from things that happen and things particularly that have happened. And just a day or two ago, there was an election in the country of Kenya, and the winner was a man called William Ruto. And William Ruto is a very interesting person to me to now become the head of the Kenyan government. So first of all, there are about 50 countries in Africa for a total of about 1.25 billion people, roughly. It's a lot of people, right? 1,250 million people throughout Africa. The seventh, Kenya is about the seventh country in terms of population. Kenya's got about 55 million people. The biggest country in Africa, population-wise, is Nigeria, with about 220 million people approximately. Just by point of comparison, the United States of America is about 320 million approximately. So Nigeria, 220 million. And then going down from there, you've got countries like Egypt and countries like South Africa. And number 7, I think, is Kenya with about 55 million people. Now, interestingly enough, by the way, if you rank the countries of Africa by gross domestic product, by how much economic output is there, you wouldn't be surprised to hear that the listing's about the same. Kenya is again about number 7 with Nigeria on top, followed by countries like Egypt and South Africa and Morocco, and finally number 7 is the country of Kenya. So that just sort of places it in context. It's also worth noting that the new colonial power in Africa is China. The Belt and Road Initiative that China started about 15 or 15 years ago, I think, was a program whereby China was going to provide infrastructure, whether it was harbors and ports, railway lines, electrical grids, bridges and highways. China would build all of that, and they would set up a payment program, a loan program. And if and when the borrowing country was not able to keep up with the payment terms, China would then acquire certain assets in that country. In some cases, it's access to raw materials. Would lithium, nickel, and cobalt surprise you if you hear those? Yeah, this is a country that is a serious country, China. A very, very serious country, which is why it is that in last week's show, I actually raised the question about investing in a country that wastes absolutely no time, money, or resources on diversity, equity, and inclusion, wastes no money at all on climate and environment, China is building about 200 coal-powered utility plants this year, which means they're also having to open about 150 new coal mines. So that gives you an idea of how utterly meaningless it is when California rules that by 2030 there will be no more gasoline-driven cars. Only electric cars are going to be what are allowed to sell in California. So be it. But this is sheer frivolity, and it would be funny if it weren't so dangerous. But my point is, China is growing and expanding. Also, there are people who say, well, just you wait. Their economy is on the verge of collapse because there is too much interference. There's too much Communist Party and governmental interference. No, that isn't altogether correct. There is a great deal of governmental interference in the marketplace in the United States of America. And a huge amount, because what you've got in America is interference on an academic level, meaning the entire marketplace in the United States of America was distorted because of the pressure that the government brought to bear on the university system. In other words, the growth of university, the emphasis that everyone has to go to university, the providing of government money for very low-cost student loans, which, as you now know, President Biden has rescinded and has forgiven the loans for large numbers of people who borrowed money to get utterly useless degrees. That's right. They now also, because the universities are the hotbed of equity, diversity, and inclusivity, and climate, and gender, and all of these fascinating things which have no reality to them whatsoever, the university systems have had to hire a great number of administrators. Today, almost every American university has far more administrators than it has teachers. And so this is a system that can't possibly work. Back in during the Obama administration, I think it was 2015, Michelle Obama went on television and did this big promotion that was echoed and replayed everywhere, how everybody must get a university degree and everybody needs to and everyone deserves to get a university degree. Well, of course, it made absolutely no sense whatsoever. And if you think about it, the loan program actually comes out to be one of the most astounding money transfer programs in all of American history, right? It's really extraordinary when you think about it. It's a way of taking money from taxpayers and giving it to university employees. That's really what it became. And if you think that's insignificant, then you don't know how many people are employed by universities. And you also don't know enough about the revolving door in the United States of America between government and university faculties. So if you wonder who your real rulers are, those who influence your life, those who have power over increasingly arcane areas, details in your life are now in the control of government bureaucracies, then you are beginning to understand, perhaps, the connection between government and universities. Anyway, something else that happened, not with Mrs. Obama, it happened with President Barack Obama, again during the summer of 2015. He traveled to Kenya, and uncharacteristically, in a way, unfortunately, that has made so many people around the world disdainful of the United States of America, because this is impudence of the highest order. He arrived as a state visitor. As a visitor of the head of Kenya's government at the time was a man known as Uhuru Kenyatta. Uhuru Kenyatta, I think, is the son of, I think may have been the very first Prime Minister of Kenya after the departure of the British in 1962 approximately. And his name was Jomo Kenyatta. Now, it so happens that Jomo Kenyatta had a going at with Barack Obama's father. Barack Obama's father worked in the Kenyan government back then, and at that point the Soviet Union was extremely influential in Africa. They were trying to do what China is now successfully doing, basically colonializing Africa in the wake of the vanishing European colonials of Belgium, England, France, and Germany. France usually further north, but also in West Africa. These are the European countries, Portugal, that had enormous influence in Africa for many years. They leave in the early 60s, and the Soviets swoop in. And so many of the heads of state in those days were either already Soviets or influenced, very people who had bought into the socialism of the Soviet Union, and this was true for Tanzania and many other countries around the continent of Africa. One of the people who had been enormously influenced by the Soviets and the socialist philosophy was Barack Obama's father, who came to blows with Jomo Kenyatta, the prime minister, because even at that point, Barack Obama's father was an ardent and avid socialist, maybe a communist. It's only a question of degree, and he very much wanted to overthrow the government in Kenya, and he saw himself as the next head of the Kenyan government. I don't doubt for a moment that Barack Obama's primary philosophical affiliation is not with Christianity, it's not with Islam, it's with socialism. And I'm quite sure that he learnt it from his father. It's interesting that when he named his book, he didn't call it Dreams of My Father, he called it Dreams from My Father. And that was President Barack Obama indicating that his dreams he had obtained from his father, and those were the dreams of socialism. At any rate, Obama Sr. and Kenyatta Sr. Had a fight in the mid-1960s, about 1965 it was, at that point, in terms of what direction Kenya would take after the departure of the British. And it's so funny that now in 2015, many years later, the sons of the two men come to, not to blows, but they argue. And what it is that Barack Obama does a state visit, and he's greeted by the head of Kenya, namely Uhuru Kenyatta, and he starts lecturing him in front of television, in front of the whole nation of Kenya. He starts lecturing him on homosexual rights. And very, very politely, Uhuru Kenyatta said, look, that's not our priority in Kenya. The majority of our population do not see that as the thing we've got to do more than anything else. There are a lot of other things we're interested in, including entrepreneurship and the building up of strong families. This was in 2015. Time has gone by, and when I'm telling you this now, it's 2022, and the winner of the latest election in Kenya is President William Ruto. President William Ruto and his wife are serious Christians. And so are 85% of Kenya's population. That's right, 85% of Kenyans are serious Christian. Islam in Kenya, 11%. And that's about it, right? 85 and 11 is 96. So there's a small number of people of various other faiths. Almost nobody in Kenya lists themselves as atheist. And so you've got a country now that rejected President Obama's impudent lecture on they must introduce rights for homosexuals in Kenya. Like, what business is it of yours? You're the head of state of another country. What business is it of yours to lecture and try and impose your values on that country? What is it? Who invited you to do that? Okay, it's just one of the ways in which America lost a great deal of prestige. They did it constantly, and And one of the things in America they disliked about President Trump is he didn't do that. He accepted that different countries have different values. And that if Saudi Arabia's value is that it's okay to murder a dissenting journalist, it's not nice. We don't like it in our eyes, but it is their way. And that's what President Trump said, and that was the position he took, and it was considered to be completely outrageous, because that's not the American way. Well, of course it isn't. The American way is for Americans, although it would be nice if that was still true. But it's certainly not to be imposed upon other. It's so bizarre. It really, really is. China is coming into Africa. They're not imposing any philosophy. They're not imposing any way of life. It's a straightforward economic arrangement. And people might disparage it by saying, well, it's just about the money. And the answer to that is that a relationship based on money is a lot more of a reliable and very much more of an honest relationship than a relationship based on imposition of other values. And so I must say that I'm always very comfortable dealing with people who are doing it for the money. You know, the plumber who came to my house to do repairs, the person from the internet company I patronize came to repair my internet. These people are doing it for the money. It's wonderful. It's really, really nice. The restaurant I attended the other night, also for the money. And it's great because you can have a straightforward relationship. It's clear. This is what you're going to do for me. This is how much I'm going to pay you. Fantastic. And we shake hands and we're complete friends. But where the motivation is something else, very often power, then that changes everything. When somebody is doing something, not for the money, but for a more concealed reason, perhaps to attain a position of power over you, very often the case, particularly in politics and government, that is not nearly as pleasant as a situation where the relationship is based on money, which is only a good thing. Sometimes when a relationship is based on, oh, don't worry, I'll just do it for you as a favor, don't worry, it's sometimes awkward, and it's something that one should be very, very careful about. It's not easy because very often you want something done a little bit differently. But if somebody says, oh, don't worry, I'll just do it as a favor, you feel awkward saying, yeah, but I actually needed it done this way, not that way, or I'd like it done in blue and not in yellow, or whatever it is you choose. But if somebody's doing it as a favor, it's very difficult. Whereas a relationship based on a commercial interaction is always comfortable for everybody. It's a good thing, and it's something we should welcome. So I urge you to always protest when in your presence you hear somebody say, oh, he's just in it for the money. That's wonderful. I'd much rather somebody's in it for the money than he's in it for some nefarious purpose. There could be so many other reasons he's in it. Money is a wonderful way of lubricating human interaction, and it's very positive, and you should have no compunctions about doing things for money. You should have no awkwardness about naming your price when you are doing a service for somebody else. Now, I'm not saying there's never a time for courtesy, there's never a time for compassion, there's never time to indeed do somebody a favor out of friendship. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But don't confuse that with professional relationships, which means that it's a relationship based on money, a very good and wonderful and positive thing. Now, the next thing that we have to talk about, because again, it's part of the disturbing trend that any happy warrior needs to contend with, whether you are in Kenya, as many, many, many of our happy warriors are, and to all of you watching and listening from Kenya right now, God bless, and thank you for being a Kenyan happy warrior. There are several cities or towns in Kenya with which I'm familiar from when I lived in Africa. Nairobi, of course, I've been in several times. Down at the coast, there was a wonderful coastal town. It's been a number of years since I've been there. It was called Malindi. And then, of course, the main coastal area, Mombasa, and the seaport. Anyway, a lot of Chinese involvement there as well. The original railway through Kenya, and Kenya has a very interesting topography. Obviously, there's a low coastal plain, but the land rises, and there is a fairly high area of Kenya as well. And so building the railroad through Kenya, which the British did, between the two world wars, I believe it was, or maybe, I'm not sure, early on, either at the end of the 19th or early 20th century, was quite an undertaking. And only it was used until recently when the Chinese replaced it with a more modern line. But until then, very much so. And today, of course, well, as I said, China is colonizing Africa. Financial relationships, to be sure, and well, we shall see what happens. But China is certainly acting very much in its own economic interests. And in China, if people buy electric cars, it'll be because they want to, and not because the government is forcing people to do that. In the United States, if government interference with the free market, if the government would stop deciding who are the winners and who are the losers, the number of electric cars would be very low. But right now, ordinary folks in America are being taxed so as that additional money can be given to people who've purchased electrical cars. It's very much a tampering with the free market. People installing solar cells on their houses, they're not doing that because it makes sense to them. They're doing it because the government is giving them money to do it. Why is the government giving them money to do all this? It would be fine if somewhere along the line it made economic sense, but it doesn't. They're doing it because of climate change. And this is something, this idea that you must focus on an ultimate good is something that has always been promoted by America's enemies. Way back in the bad old days of the bad old Soviet Union, the KGB funded American student activities. And I myself am friendly with a number of people who, when they were students in the mid to late 60s, were on the receiving end of KGB funds. Subterfuge and unofficially, they were receiving large amounts of Soviet money to organize students into anti-Vietnam War protests. Yeah, that was being promoted by the Soviets. And today, there is a great deal of foreign influence in the United States of America pushing the climate agenda. So much so that newspapers like the New York Times often print phrases like, I took this from a recent issue just the last couple of days, of course the world is warming at a horrendous rate, as everyone knows. Honestly, as everyone knows, the world is warming at a horrendous rate. No, actually, I don't know that at all. But this is all propaganda that is being pushed on us, because that way we can be persuaded to act against our own economic interests. And again, what possible advantage is served by having people drive electrical cars when that electricity has to come from somewhere, and it cannot be supplied? Don't for one moment believe it can be supplied by windmills or by solar cells. That's not happening. And the batteries themselves are made with metals that have to be mined. As a matter of fact, just recently, the calculations have been made, and you can look this up if it interests you, that more emissions of carbon emissions into the atmosphere are produced in the manufacturing of an electrical car battery, right? Average electrical car battery weighs over 1,000 pounds. Think about that. And think about something else, and that is that when you drive around in your gasoline-driven car, each mile you drive makes the amount of weight you are carrying a little less than it was before, because you start off with a full tank, shall we say 20 gallons. And by the time you next fill up, and you may have done 300 miles in the interim, you've been driving around with an empty tank. Now, this is serious stuff, because that tank of gas, if you think about it, 20 gallons, gasoline weighs about roughly 6 pounds a gallon. So 6 times 20, you're carrying around about 120 pounds of fuel. But that's only at the beginning of your journey between fill-ups. Towards the end, you're carrying around almost nothing because the tank is empty. And so as the weight of the tank declines, the average extra weight you're carrying around is actually much less. A car battery weighs 1,200 pounds. Not a full tank of gasoline, about 120 pounds. 1,200 pounds, 100 times as much. No, 10 times as much. 10 times as much as a car battery. And here's the crazy thing. When it's finished, when it's empty and it's got to be recharged, it still weighs the same 1,200 pounds that it weighed at the beginning. How can this possibly be a good idea? How? And it's not as if, this is magic, no carbon, nothing has to be produced in order to fill that electric car. Well, as a matter of fact, yes, power stations have to work. And America at the moment, and neither does any other country, have the ability to do that without burning. Again, part of the stupidity, this was pushed by interests outside the United States, the danger of nuclear. Wouldn't you have thought that if you really cared about a country, if you were a patriot, and you really cared about a country, and you really, really, really believed that burning coal was bad, well then you ought to be at the forefront of the forces pushing and advocating for nuclear power, obviously. And the proof of this is that quietly, this is behind the scenes, but you can read about it in the news, Germany is retroactively classifying nuclear power as green. Germany was also at the forefront of getting rid of nuclear, got to get rid of nuclear, got to get rid of coal, got to get rid of natural gas, got to get rid of oil. Leaving what? Windmills and solar power? Good luck to you, Germans, this winter. Guess what? They're restarting up their nuclear power stations that they had shut down. Yeah, what I'm talking about here is that when you do not have a religious system decreeing what is moral and what is virtuous, you then inevitably create your own. People do this. A culture does this. You yourself may not necessarily be doing it, but that doesn't matter. Millions of people operating in concert doesn't mean that every single person does the same thing as every other person all the time. But the culture as an entity is moving in a certain direction. And one of the directions it's moving in is exactly this idea of finding alternative expressions of virtue. Because this is something I've spoken about in the past, and it's something that you really need to understand as you're working out how to prioritize your 5 F's, right? And if you're a newcomer to the show, your 5 F's are your family, your finances, your faith, your fitness, and your friendships. Those are the 5 things needed for a healthy, productive, successful, fulfilling life. All of those 5 things. And as you work out how to prioritize these things and to evaluate which ones are you deficient in and how are you going to restore that, then you also need to be aware that part of the way we are constructed is that we feel virtue through sacrifice. All of us do. And that's what lies at the root of the book of Leviticus with all the sacrificial rites. A lot of what's being taught to us there is this fundamental need that we all have as human beings to demonstrate to ourselves chiefly that we are more than merely biological mechanisms constructed out of $10 worth of common chemicals that simply get born and eat and defecate and replicate and reproduce and then die. because the notion that that's all there is to us is almost intolerable to any thinking person. And even people who are not necessarily thinking people, at some point or another in the quiet hours of the night, get bothered by these things. And so one of the ways we show that we're much more than just biological entities, we're much more than hedgehogs, is by means of sacrifice, because no animal sacrifices for an abstract ideal. Mothers, maternal mammals will certainly sacrifice in order to keep their kids alive, their little puppies or kittens or whatever it is. But for human beings, it goes beyond that. Human beings will sacrifice for a cause, for a belief, for an idea. That's very different. No animal does that. That's one of the important ways in which we human beings are utterly unique, different from every other creature. And so what faith does for us is provides us a healthy outlet for sacrifice. A healthy outlet for sacrifice. Charity. Raising children. Providing for a wife. These are sacrifices, right? It makes a lot of sense when you read some of the men going their own way literature. We don't need wives. We don't need. You can understand what they're saying. Yes, if we are nothing but hedgehogs, if we're nothing but two-legged orangutans, if we're nothing but biological entities that eat and drink and defecate and replicate and die, yeah, I guess you don't, I guess you don't. I mean, there are plenty of animals, plenty of male animals in the wild that die without ever having replicated themselves. Plenty. Because nature only requires some of them to do so. But with human beings, there's a different need. And so if you believe you are nothing but a biological entity, then you may well say, I don't need children. Yeah, you actually do. But by the time you figure that out, it's too late. That's why everybody needs, you'll pardon me saying so, everyone needs a rabbi. That's the idea. And it's worth understanding. So a secular society, a society that, for the last 60 years has stripped faith out of the village square, whatever country you're living in, whatever country you're talking about, in my case, the United States of America, don't think that when you strip faith away, what you're left with is a benign vacuum. No. Other faiths come in as well. What do I define as a faith? A faith is something which is a belief system that provides some meaning to life. And if it's not going to be Christianity, and it's not going to be Judaism, and it's not even going to be Islam, then you're going to come up with something else. And that something else goes by many names. I call it secular fundamentalism. Some people call it wokeism. It doesn't make any difference. These are all different names for a belief system that gives you much to sacrifice for, because that's a key aspect of a belief system. Ideally, it makes sense to sacrifice for something that is in itself intrinsically meaningful and rewarding, like helping other people, like raising children, like providing for a family. But in the absence of that, even if it's a meaningless sacrifice, it provides value. That's right, because human beings desperately need that. And so this is one of the reasons why driving an electric car has become a virtue signal. Look, I'm a religious person. I'm a believer. That's really the modern day equivalent of a medieval faith statement. That's all it is. I worry about the climate. I worry about emissions. I care about the environment. I know that the earth is warming and we need to do something. All of this. It's feel-good belief. All very necessary in the absence of a more meaningful belief system. Obviously. That's exactly how that works. So you have to be aware of that going on around you. And you must be careful not to be entrapped by it. Because in the same way that China has the belief of the Communist Party to drive it, and so when it comes to economics, they don't interfere. They don't impose religious beliefs on the economic system. America, tragically, lacks any faith system at all, and so it imposes secular fundamentalism on the economic system. Oh, we're not going to dig for oil. We're not going to build oil pipelines. We're not going to do any fracking. We are showing how virtuous we are. Yeah, you're also killing your economy, obviously. We are going to suppress gasoline production, and we're going to get rid of gasoline cars. None of this required by the marketplace, but it is required by the church of secular fundamentalism. A serious country allows itself to make financial decisions on financial reasons. A non-serious country, or a silly country, interferes with financial decisions by virtue of belief systems superimposed upon those financials. So you, in building your finances, you should be very comfortable keeping faith and finance separate and apart. That's not to say that God despises money, because he doesn't. You see, there are two ways to get people to do your bidding. One is with a gun, and the other is with money. And God prefers the money system over the gun system any day of the week, obviously. And now, what I have to tell you about now is an article. And again, we're talking about the imposition of an external belief system that distorts reality. It's like a force field that distorts reality. And why is this done? Well, you've got to be aware that part of the Judeo-Christian worldview, and it's a Bible-based worldview, and that's one of the reasons that I speak so much about the Bible, because even if people are unaware of it, that book is what has shaped so much of the world in which we now live. And the first verse of the Bible is one we all know. I think, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. I've discussed that. It has a lot to do with the foundation of science. It has a lot to do with why the most important scientists, including Isaac Newton, that really laid the foundation for all of modern technology, these were all religious men. Every one of them was a Bible-believing man. And all of that based on, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Now, I'm not going to explain that linkage and why that is here, because I've already done that in our online program called Scrolling Through Scripture. And in Scrolling Through Scripture, you'll see it on my website on rabbidaniellapin.com. On Scrolling Through Scripture, I go through the first 34 verses of Genesis, and obviously the first verse, 7 words, 28 letters, is so very important. Yes, the foundation of modern science. But for today, the second verse is what really matters. And the second verse is, and the earth was chaos and turmoil, and there was darkness over the face of the deep. A very difficult and impenetrable verse if you don't have access to the original Hebrew, which is why everybody needs a rabbi. And I humbly submit my candidacy to be yours. And that second verse is an example of why everyone needs a rabbi. And the earth was in chaos and turmoil. What that is telling us is that the natural state of affairs is chaos, disorder. We have a scientific term for it called entropy. And one of the most important principles that you really have to understand if you really want to know how the world really works, well, that would be the second law of thermodynamics. And the second law of thermodynamics, I'm going to present it in non-scientific terms, but it's just as true. Very often, in ways that I don't know, my workspace, my desk here, which I deliberately don't want you to see, because it becomes chaotic. Now, never have I walked in here and seen it magically clean and clear and ordered. And I say to myself, when did that happen? That never happens. But I often walk in here, sit down and say, oh, this desk needs to be tidied up. When did it get so chaotic? Well, yes, it's like your children's bedroom, or like your garden, which gets filled with weeds if you don't do anything about it, or anything deteriorates. That's the second law of thermodynamics, that things move towards chaos. Why? Well, because that was the original state. So don't ask what produces chaos. Ask what produces order. Spiritual gravity produces chaos all by itself if you take away the order. And so what was God's plan, and what are we being directed? And I lay this out in considerable detail. I spent 10 hours explaining those 34 verses in scrolling through Scripture. And it's all important in terms of understanding how the world really works. And the second law of thermodynamics is that God has a world of complete chaos and turmoil, and then he starts putting it right. And he starts separating things out, because fundamental to order is separation. This belongs here. This, you see those pile of papers, doesn't belong there, it belongs here. But these papers belong somewhere else. Oh, that pen doesn't go with the papers. It goes where your pens, your writing implements belong, etc., etc. And so that's what God is doing. The earth and the water and the heavens and waters above and waters below, all of this is the beginning of extraction of order out of chaos. And then God finally creates human beings and tasks them with continuing this job of converting the world from chaos into order. And it's no accident that the religion of secular fundamentalism is exactly the opposite of Judeo-Christian Bible-based religion. And so whatever direction the Bible moves us, secular fundamentalism pushes in the reverse direction. You remember I mentioned that the first verse of the Bible has a lot to do with the emergence of scientific development. You've really got to ask yourself, why is it that Boyle's law about pressure and volume, and Maxwell's analysis of electricity, and Newton's laws of motion, and Einstein's study of the world of gravity and nuclear power, why did all that happen in Bible-based countries? Why did none of it emerge from Madagascar? Why did no scientific discovery take place of any meaningful import in China? Oh, I know they had fireworks, they had gunpowder, yeah, of course. But in terms of actually moving forward the grand enterprise of science and industry, that happened in the West, nowhere else. Why? Well, because the West had access to a magical sentence. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Now, what one has to do with the other, I can't do now, but I did already do it in scrolling through Scripture. But from now, for those of you who have already listened to scrolling through Scripture, I'll just remind you that it's not an accident that in countries where that sentence was known, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth, those countries produced scientific development through the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. They produced the Industrial Revolution in the middle of the 18th century. That's where these things happened. Absolutely. And that's really, really important to fully grasp. And then the second sentence, and the world was chaos and turmoil. That's right. That is the natural state. That is the order of things. And so everything that we do is moving as much as possible to do that. Not surprisingly, secular fundamentalism, the religion of the left, the religion of wokeism, is 180-degree reversed. It's exactly the opposite. If the Bible pushes for scientific development, then secular fundamentalism opposes it. Sure enough, that's why they despise nuclear power. It is the obvious way to generate electricity at the present time. The obvious way. Well, they hate that. And anything that is industrialized, they found a way to oppose that. Well, it produces carbon emissions, which makes the world heat up, and that makes the sea level rise. Right? All of this stuff is rubbish. Complete rubbish. It's propaganda, but we buy it. You know why? Because we have abandoned the Judeo-Christian Bible faith. And we've got to substitute for it. And we have. And that substitute pushes the other way. The Bible is in favor of human beings bringing order out of chaos. The religion of secular fundamentalism desires to bring chaos out of order. How does it do that? By destroying in every possible way all the order that has been structured. One of the most fundamental forms of order is the military. Right. And so the military allows us to maintain a distinction between our country and other countries. And if other countries attack, we have a military. Let's undermine the military so they can't do that. Let's turn the military into a social experiment where transgender will be practiced to the full. And anyone in the military who wants to change his gender, that can be done on taxpayer expense. All of this, if anybody was setting out to weaken and destroy the United States of America, they couldn't have come up with a better plan. Introduce chaos everywhere that order up till then prevailed. That's right. Order said that police exist to help maintain order, undermine and destroy the police. Order said that there is a role that separates parents from children, and that parents are responsible for the raising of their children. Great. Let's destroy that, and let's do what the former candidate for governor of the state of Virginia said. Parents shouldn't have anything to do with how their children are raised and educated. That should be done by government bureaucrats. That is, again, destroying a form of order. The reason this is so important for you in your 5Fs is because, yes, you want to make sure that you do everything possible to bring order into your life. And that means keeping your living quarters tidy. There's a reason that is a military value as well. And that ought to be a value for each and every one of us. Not because it's a military value, but because having order rather than chaos. A clean house. It's one of the great virtues for a man living with a woman, because women see dirt in a way that many men do not. Some men do, a lot of men don't. And so when you walk into a sparkling, clean, beautiful home, you know the guy's married. No question about it. When you walk into a home where a man is living alone, you pretty much know that right away. And yes, order out of chaos. That is a holy value, but it's also a value at the same time that produces a successful life, a life in which your 5Fs are being emphasized and focused on. And it's magnificent. It's hugely important. Your financial life has to be ordered, structured, not chaos. You don't just spend, you keep books, you keep financial records. You know what's happening to your finances. Your family. Chaos in family life. You don't want that. Chaos in sexual life, where people have relationships with one another, and children are born, and they have parents, they don't have parents, they've got a father, they don't have a father. All of this is an introduction of familial chaos that the left began practicing from, as I say, 1962 approximately. Again, sexual chaos, a great way to destroy a society. But as we try and focus on growing our 5Fs, order, structure, pattern, cleanliness in your finances, in your family life, in your friendships, in your physical fitness. Tackle your physical fitness in an orderly way. And in your faith, even order in the areas of faith makes sense. That's right. You think about it, you'll be able to see it. So in everything that we tackle, we try as much as possible to focus on that second sentence in the book of Genesis. God starts off with a world of chaos, and then you watch his work for the next 7 days, and all of it is focused on generating order out of chaos. And that is exactly what will bring each and every one of us the most fulfilled and happy life imaginable. It's an important step. Think about it. Order out of chaos. It's what God did, and it serves as a model for what we ought to be doing as well in each of the 5 areas that bring so much joy and so much fulfillment to our lives. And so until next week, I want to wish you a week where you will move onwards and upwards with your 5 F's. Onwards and upwards as you grow your finances, your family, your friendships, your faith, and your fitness. I'm Rabbi Daniel Lapin. God bless.